ever. So I don't know what Luke said, but yeah, I'm Brian, founder of Venn. And I think today my role and sort of contribution to various meetings I have nowadays is probably around brand strategy. A lot of clients come to us for a new website as an outcome, or they want more results, they want more candidates. But a lot of the time, the overarching conversation that gets missed is the sort of purpose of the brand and what is the relevance of having a brand. And I remember one marketeer saying, hey, listen, it doesn't matter about our brand. As long as we have the vacancy and we fill it, that's our job's done. So I think there's a bit of an opportunity, more so in recruitment than ever before, to build trusted, sustainable long-term brands that both clients, candidates and employees want to work for and be connected with. So I think today's presentation, I'm going to try and keep it to the point. I think branding can be quite subjective. So I wanted to give some experiences of how structured we've tried to become with the branding process for our clients, and hopefully give you a few takeaways where, again, you guys can use this structure to maybe look at your own brand and how it can tell a story that serves a purpose to your audience. So I will start going through some of the slides. Let's hope they will work. So brand, what a company stands for and how is better or different, or how it is better or different. I think the old Simon Sinek presentation it's years old now, but the kind of who, what, why. A lot of people can't really answer that well. I think they can answer who they are, they can answer what they do, but they can't always say why they do it. So initially, when you're looking at a brand, the best thing to do sometimes with recruitment is to take a step away from recruitment, I find. And a lot of the inspiration we take and a lot of the examples we use isn't other recruitment companies, and it's certainly not competitors in the market. I think the brands that I admire will be ones that are more like a Brewdog, a Gymshark, any disruptive new brand that's come into the market where there's a perceived saturated market already, especially something like the drinks market, where a gin can come into an already saturated market and stand tall alongside established brands like Gordon's. So I think there's also lots of opportunities in tech, fintech, you name it. There's drinks, retail. There's lots of examples where brands have created an identity in an already perceived and crowded market. And I'll refer back to some of them later on, but again, you only have to look as far-reaching as, well, recruitment saturated, there's thousands of recruitment companies. You can apply the same logic to banking, but yet Monzo, Revolut stand out as a brand. You know, they really stand tall in terms of who they are and what they offer, because they clearly understand who their audience is. So I think it's a brand identity. We'll come back to how we define that. I think the branding piece is what most people get distracted by during the web design process. I think for most founders, this is the most passionate part of their contribution to the overall web project. They get really upset and emotional about the branding side, because ultimately that's the use of their logo. It's what they created back in 1995, and they love the colour blue, and that's what they want to be, and that's who they've always been. So I think the kind of subjectivity over branding can always be quite a sticking point in a web design process, and it's often a thing that slows the whole process down. So what we try to do is build a set of rationale, scorecards, detail, understanding of where the branding's come from, what's the purpose of the branding, who's the brand for. And one thing I'm always trying to point out to people, especially the founders of organisations, to support the marketing director, to support the marketing manager, the branding nowadays, which we'll come on to in another slide, it's not actually for us, it's for our target audience. If you look at the brand of Nike and Adidas and Gymshark, or let's say Monzo, the products for the next generation. If you bank with NatWest and HSBC, Monzo's not for you. Monzo's for the next generation of young people who want to engage in banking in a slightly different way. So they knew who their audience was, and therefore their branding, if you think of the colours used in the Monzo branding now, you can see who the branding's aimed at. It's for that next generation, hence it's full of colour. It doesn't have to be the scary corporate brand that perhaps our parents appearance we're used to. So ultimately, sort of defining a brand strategy. I think overall, one challenge we'll have with a lot of our clients when they come to Venn, that look, fundamentally, what is your brand strategy? Do you have a brand strategy? When's the last time you wrote down what your brand strategy is? And it's scary, the amount of marketeers, founders, company owners that just simply don't have that. They don't have anything written down, so therefore it's very subjective when we go through the design process as to what people want to hang their hat on. And like I say, there's a few tool tips we'll share today in terms of we can help people scorecard what their branding and what their brand strategy could be. On this slide, you'll begin to kind of fundamentally get a feel for, as you step back away from your company brand, especially in recruitment. I think people in the recruitment sector, we can service a multitude of different industries. You can very quickly go from construction to healthcare to tech. So it's very hard to ultimately have one consistent brand when you service so many different sectors. And those sectors have to be spoken to in so many different ways. So I think that, again, that's why it's good to step back and see, right, what other industries have mixed audiences? What other industries have a tone of voice that can go from this type of person to that type of person? Because I know we're placing candidates, but that's not a good brand experience. We can't just treat people as candidates. And I know that's often the way we speak about them, but that's not a great brand strategy if you want your website to convert. So I think for us, it's taking a deep dive into understanding, right, who are the personalities we're going after? What's the profile and the demographic of who we want to engage with, and how do we want to engage with them? Part of that understanding of who we're going after, how we want to service them, will define how we want to come across. And I think for some brands that we work with, it can vary massively. We talk a lot about the kind of competitive advantage of your brand. Part of the workshop we go through is what makes you unique, special, or different. And if you can't answer those questions, you do have a challenge on your hands. If you don't understand what makes you unique, special, or different, that's a concern, because ultimately you will just fight over the subjectivity of the colour or size of the logo. And that's something we just really don't want to get embroiled into, because it's a dead end in a lot of the conversations you'll have. So for us, if you have been in the market 10, 15, 25 years, you are a heritage brand. And that's something you should embrace, be proud of, and if anything, promote, because there's plenty of recruitment startups. There's lots of guys will go away and leave their boss and set up a rival company the next day. They don't have the heritage. They don't have the prestige. They don't have the status. They don't have the trust. They don't have the proof that you guys have. So use that to your advantage. It's really shocking the amount of, and I'm talking global brands that we work with, who simply don't, they've got the heritage, but they don't have the proof. And if anything, that's their competitive advantage. They've got the case studies, they've got the content, they've got the know-how, but they never think to market that content on the website, because for me, that's the proof that they've got and the competitive advantages they have. In the same way, if they're a startup, they can be disruptive. They can be different. They don't have the shackles. They don't have the red tape, and they can be a challenger brand. And again, going back to the Monzo example, going back to the Brewdog example, these can be your challenger, disruptive brands, and certain people like that, want to work for that, want to appoint that type or consume that type of brand. So I think it's really important that you try and take an understanding of who we are, what we do, and how we want to position our brand strategy. Forget logo, forget colour palette. Just work out who you are and where you sit on the scale of some sort of brand identity and what that says about you. Because ultimately, that's the type of people you will attract to your organisation. So I think I put prove it. It's a big, big thing. We talk a lot to, well, I talk to a lot of my clients. It's become a little tedious meeting with recruitment businesses who say they're number one, we're the best in our market, we are the number one. We must hear it 5 or 6 times a week. So I think for me, if people are going to say they're number one, prove it. If you're going to say you're the best, prove it. If you're going to say we're the biggest, prove it. So I think it's a really good test that as a marketeer, marketing manager, marketing director, company owner, unless you can prove it, don't say it. Unless you can prove you are genuinely unique, special and different, don't use those words. Don't put nonsense on the homepage saying that we were founded by two people who wanted to do recruitment differently. No, you didn't. And I think ultimately it's just an absolute lie, it's a con, and it's not stand out anymore. So I think we've got an opportunity where the homepage can be your brand identity, it can be your edge, it can be a point of difference. But as much proof as possible will give people that clear, okay, these guys could be different. These guys could actually offer me something I've not seen or heard before. And I think proof can underpin that a lot of the time, but you have to be willing to prove it. So part of what we start to break down with our clients is identity, exploration and guidelines. For me, number one, to identify step by step, we want to basically get under the skin of your business. So I'll spend a long time sitting with the founders. It could be the founders of the organisation, which might be different from the current managing director who's running the business day to day. We want to try and understand the different personalities that make up the business and identify some of the opportunities, some of the values, some of the words that are being used around the office and maybe how they've changed over time. There's always that conflict, again, within heritage brands where the founder may describe his or her business in a very certain way. And ultimately, the new managing director or the new marketing director might not always feel comfortable challenging that's quite an old way of describing who we are and what we did, and we've probably moved on since then. And I think that's where you're trying to remove emotion from the process. It's not about us. This website, this brand, who we are, is for our candidates, it's for our clients. We need to be absolutely laser focused on them. Again, if you look at some of the best brands in the world, they're obsessive over their customer. They're obsessive. They know exactly who their customers are. So for us, it's really about doing that in recruitment. It's making sure we're really clear that we identify who's this brand for, and we tailor all of the content, the tone of voice, and the design for that target persona, for that target audience. Part of that then allows us to build, and I'll show you an example later on very quickly, but I think as we build and layer up the story, as we use colours, content, design, imagery, fonts, we can begin to create an identity that's reflective of that target audience. I think there's lots of different ways in which you can do that, which again, I won't go into detail today, but once you start to layer imagery, content, look and feel, identity of the target audience you're going after, that starts to play back into the new brand values, into the new brand identity, into the new brand pack that you create for your brand and your business. That then becomes less subjective. There's less, well, I don't like that. Well, it doesn't really matter because it's not for you. It's for our target audience, which we've all agreed are these people. That then allows you to create guidelines. Again, the concern that we constantly see when we're redesigning websites is just lack of guidelines. If there's no guidelines, it means there's no process, there's no structure, therefore things can be done however that person chooses. One of two things happens with Venn websites. We've always prided ourselves on the design of what we do. I think we put a lot of time and effort into trying to create beautiful websites with genuinely unique photography that stands out, and the imagery and the content is really all about that brand and the identity of the audience we're going after. So we have to create guidelines where we can, and if the client's willing to pay for guidelines, we do think it's a worthwhile thing doing, because ultimately what happens is we publish the website, 6 weeks later, an apprentice, a junior marketeer writes a blog and they'll just use a random image because they don't know any better. They'll just throw up an image that's got nothing to do with brand guidelines, and suddenly you start to move away from the brand guidelines. A proper business like Nike, Gymshark, Adidas would never allow a random image from Getty, a random image from iStock to be put up on their blog, their landing page, or the category page. It must be approved by the head of brand. And that's how we've got to start putting these behaviours into recruitment. We use it on LinkedIn, we use it on the website, we use it on social media. We must try and be consistent with the brand that we've built. So therefore, guidelines are super important. I had a big brand session yesterday with a very large recruitment brand in UK, Europe and America. They've got 5 divisions, and every single one of the 5 divisions had their own interpretation of what the brand was. and their attitude was, well, I don't care. That's my division, it's my department, and I'll do what I want. So it was actually quite stunning to see how big this business was, but yet their attitude was, I couldn't care less what the company logo is. My division's all about this. We need to sound like this, look like this, and act like this. And that was the kind of scary part, that when you kind of brought them back on track and say, imagine Nike did that, imagine Adidas did that, imagine these different brands did that and had the same attitude, would you trust that brand? Would you buy from that brand? Would you be proud to wear that brand if it constantly looked slightly different from the last iteration of what you bought or engaged with? So I think it's sometimes nice to just step away from the recruitment industry and just see how other brands behave. So as you kind of create that identity pack, just to summarise this point of the presentation, I think ultimately for me, it's about trying to get a brand roadmap put together. Don't forget that brands evolve. I think brands, for me, a great example of how brands have evolved. Ernst & Young have become EY.com. Warner Brothers have become WB. Part of the evolution, when you listen to people like that talking about why they've evolved, it's been driven by social media. WB works on an app. Warner Brothers doesn't work on an app. So I think people's brand identity, people's logos have had to evolve, because now we have to fit everything in this square box, driven by the LinkedIn box, driven by the app on your phone, driven by the social media way in which we do it. So I think in the past, that's why directors want to see big logos on the top of their website, because they're used to seeing on the side of the building. Whereas nowadays, because we live in a digital economy, it's got to fit on the size of your thumb. That's where branding is headed. So it's not about making it bigger, it's about actually making it smaller, because ultimately we're increasing the usage of everything we're doing on mobile. So if your logo doesn't work on the size of a phone, it's not going to work at all. So I think that's a slight irony when we meet a lot of founders. They're still desperate for the logo to go bigger, not smaller. Positioning statements. Again, this is a big thing for me, really understanding how you position your business. I think in sales, it's called an elevator pitch. For me, I think that elevator pitch has to be front and center on your website. Less is more. I was taught a phrase many, many moons ago that clever people simplify things, stupid people complicate them. If you cannot summarize what your business does in no more than 2 or 3 sentences, you're not in control of your brand. If you have to explain for 15 minutes what your organization does, you don't have a brand strategy. So your positioning statement, for ours, it's consult, build, optimize. We've got a very clear statement where we consult, we build, and then we optimize. So I've tried to make our brand strategy, if we do ever create them, consult, build, optimize, business results from creative minds. We've always tried to simplify a lot of waffle into just 2 or 3 words. So then it enables the sales team or the design team or the content team to put their interpretation on what that means. But ultimately, we need to know who our audience is and what they'll respond to. So again, if you've never done it before, I think it's a really healthy exercise to almost choose 4 different target personas. An obvious one being candidates, clients, future employees, investors. And I think that's quite an obvious place to start, but there's no such thing as a candidate. No 2 candidates are the same. These are human beings you're talking about. And again, if I'm honest, I don't see enough recruitment businesses doing the breakdown of that DNA. So if we talk about a candidate, well, how does that differ if they're a nursing candidate, somebody who really cares about care and is spoken to in a different way and they value different things, from somebody who's in tech is very different to somebody who's in construction. So I think the overall tone of voice can evolve on your website. Again, no different to if you went to Halfords or Sports Direct. When you click into the mountain biking section, all you want to hear about mountain biking. And that's very different to road bikes. Their diet, the requirement, the tyres, the bike, the chassis, the suspension, the whole tone and content of that category of that website will be very different to swimming, will be very different to football. So I think these e-commerce brands are very good at identifying their target core audience and making sure they can tailor the tone of voice and the content for that specific persona and personality. Something that Meg will add or has added into the presentation in the chat is the personality sliders. Again, it's a good exercise to sit with in your organisation, and you can change it. I think some in there, it's, are you a Rolex or are you an iWatch? Are you Coca-Cola or are you Pepsi? Are you Mercedes or are you Tesla? And initially kind of look at it and think, oh, what's that got to do with recruitment? And I think that's the whole point. It's got nothing to do with recruitment, because I think if you're going to challenge your founders, if you're going to challenge your bosses, if you're going to challenge your colleagues in terms of what is our brand strategy, sometimes it's nice to step away from our competition of, oh, they use yellow, so we should use yellow, or their logo is big, so our logo should be big. I think we have to step away and say, well, where would we position ourselves in the likes of Coca-Cola versus Red Bull? Coca-Cola is the first and most established fizzy drink on the planet, bar none. Nobody's ever come close. Pepsi's tried, but Pepsi was for a new generation because they knew they could never surpass Coca-Cola from a brand, product, or taste, because it's fundamentally the same thing. They just got there first. So their positioning statement was all about the new generation. It wasn't aimed at the parents. Pepsi was aimed at the children. I think it's probably similar to Red Bull versus Coca-Cola. You know, you don't drink Coca-Cola on the ski slopes. You drink Red Bull because you're a high octane, out there, extreme sports kind of dude. And therefore the brand association is very clear. People want to be associated with Red Bull for a very clear reason. They know exactly where they sit on that personality sliding scale. So going back to your recruitment organisation, are you a Red Bull? Young, disruptive, hungry, dynamic, energetic? Or are you Coca-Cola, heritage, proud, established, safe? You know exactly what you're getting on the tin. It's quality, it's consistent, no matter where you are in the world. This is what you'll get with the brand experience. So I think the competitive landscape, it's good to plot yourself on this brand strategy document using these personality sliders, because you can ultimately begin to define, right, where do we actually sit? And more importantly, where do we want to sit? And that can become part of your brand strategy as well. Just now we're here and we want to get there. And that could be globally, that could be different sectors. But unless you've got a clear brand tone of voice, it's quite hard to fulfill those ambitions. A big statement at the bottom, it's not for you, it's for your customers. I really mean that. Again, it's probably a takeaway statement that probably a lot of you could use if you are looking to evolve your brand or logo. I think understanding that this brand isn't for you. It's not for your founder. It's not for their friends or their mates. It's not for HR. It's for your target audience. It's what they are seeing. It's what they're connecting with. It's what they're trusting, especially when it's something as important as a career. They have to engage in a brand where they can trust the next move. I don't buy into, if I'm honest, the promotion of recruiter brands. It's all about your brand. It's all about your identity. I know there's a couple of people who peddle that in the industry. I don't understand why recruiters constantly put content onto LinkedIn and not putting it on their own website. It's crazy. It's just crazy. You're just making the LinkedIn brand more valuable and completely devaluing your own brand. Why spend all this money on a beautiful destination, a beautiful website with lots of functionality, but yet you put all your unique content onto LinkedIn? Because once it's on there, it stays there and it's never back at your destination. So people need to think about the type of brand strategy that they want to have for their organization. For me, try and use LinkedIn as a signpost to get people away from LinkedIn back over to the website. People should be hanging about on your website for more than just jobs. I think the best recruitment websites we design and build have more than just vacancies. They've got downloads, guides, salary surveys. They've got fuel price calculators. They've got events. They've got videos. They've got interactive quizzes. There's so much more that can be sitting on your website to enhance the overall brand experience. And that, for me, is the whole purpose of signposting on LinkedIn, where people can recognize the brand, but they can come over and consume content on your website, because suddenly you can open up that trust. You can open up more about who you are and what you do. It's not just about a recruiter posting one post or a recruiter posting one job. That's not a brand experience. I think too many businesses are obsessed with filling the vacancies, but they're not focused on filling their own identity over a period of months and years. And that's ultimately what makes the brand very valuable. And I'll come on to employer brand later on and what impact it can have. Tone of voice. Again, it's a big topic and probably not one I can cover too much today, but I think ultimately the way you describe yourself, the way people write on behalf of the brand, if you take it away from the likes of a recruitment agency, where there's 6 of you in that recruitment agency or there's 600, there should be a tone of voice. There should be a way in which, when Ven launched Venture, Meg had to come up with a document called Venglish, because every single person in this business was calling the platform something different. It was innocent, but it was there were modules we were using, they were VSMs, they were building blocks. So we had to kind of say, look, stop, this is misrepresenting our brand and what we're creating. We have to almost create a new glossary of how we want to explain what we do. Otherwise, we'll confuse our customers, we'll confuse the brand, and people won't come back. So what we did begin to do is understand, right, where do we sit? How do we want to describe ourselves? So I think Meg has chosen to highlight this. I don't know if it's a compliment or not, but we are an outlaw. We are liberal. We want to leave our mark on the world. I think that's probably representative of where Ven is at as a brand at the moment. We want to disrupt recruitment. We want to try and create a product that's a completely flexible content management system. We all know the guilty parties in the industry who flogged templates for a long, long time and removed the ability for people to design stuff. We don't want to be that. We want to be a disruptive business that gives people freedom and flexibility to design what they want. So we want to kind of leave our mark in the recruitment industry by simplifying the demand for technology with great flexible design and content marketing. We've tried our best as a business, and it's evolving all the time, to create 4 packages where people can get value out of their website, to get away from LinkedIn and build value with their branded destination. It's an asset that you can invest in constantly. All you're doing at the moment is giving all the value to LinkedIn and nothing back to the business you work for, and that seems a missed opportunity. As you go around this, I mean, we work with NES, we work with Randstad. These are multi-billion pound businesses, and they're very cautious over their brand, but it doesn't mean that they can't work with disruptive content to turn people's heads. So I think ultimately it's trying to put yourself on a chart. Where do we sit? And as you go further into it, do you want to just simply connect and build networking, your reputation with others because you're established? Do you want to provide structure and insights? Do you ultimately want to be an aspirational brand, or do you want to be disruptive? So you can kind of go around this presentation deck and build your own version of it, but ultimately it's trying to understand where we sit. The reason why this is so important, and I'll just conclude in these next few slides, I think part of the reason why this is so important, you begin to attract a certain type of person. If you get your brand right and you get your corporate brand right, you'll naturally attract a certain type of person. That's something I've noticed with the Ven brand over the years. I think when we were young and completely maverick, a certain type of person joined this business, and a certain type of culture was being driven as a result of those types of people. I think as we've matured and grown, and I've got grayer and grayer, we're now attracting a slightly different type of employee. Therefore, those employees and colleagues are creating a slightly different corporate brand. It's more grown up, it's more established, it's more trusted, it's more proven. Therefore, we don't have to behave like a maverick startup. We can be proud that we're an established business that's done this for 12 years. We've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight, a lot of trust, but yet we're still relatively disruptive in the way we go about building our product and challenging a very staid industry. For those of you who've met me, I'm always talking about how recruitment has to evolve. Recruitment's one of the last industries to sort itself out online. The reliance on the lazy job board, LinkedIn, it has to change. It's not a good user experience at all. I'll dispute that all day long. You can buy cars, boats, houses, bank accounts. You can get relationships. You can get what you want online, but simply getting a job is terrible. It's a terrible experience at the moment. So we actually have to change the way in which people search and apply for jobs. And by doing that with an established brand, a trusted brand, a transparent brand that builds value, you'll naturally start to attract a different type of employee. One of the products we released last year, and we'll promote more so this year, is a separate careers website to that of your corporate brand. So something that we're quite keen on having is a separate culture. I think recruitment businesses are amazing. I think some of the incentives, the progress and the careers you can have are second to none. If you work in recruitment, I was a recruiter for 8 years. I love it, and that's why I've stayed in the sector. But ultimately, that should sit on a separate website. The content, the culture, the inclusion, the training, the development, the progress, the earning potential cannot sit on your corporate website. That's for your customers. But careers can sit over here. But does that brand reflect on both websites? Are you transparent enough to put online what your employer brand does? I think that flows through to your offices. A lot of the rebrands we do for our clients, they then take the logo, they take the colour palette, they take the identity, and they'll literally refit out their offices. Please don't underestimate the importance of going to get people back to work. They have to want to come back to work. So maybe going through a rebrand over the next 12 months could influence people wanting to come back to work. Then you'll see on our careers website, we've chosen deliberately to be based in a place called Audley Park. And Audley Park's a very different location. It's all about co-working. It's a huge space in the middle of a farm in the middle of Cheshire, but it's designed to give our staff and colleagues a place to work hard, but also they can walk around the lake, they can go to the pub, they can chase the sheep across the road. But it says something about our employer brand, but it also says something to the clients who choose to work with us, that we are a type of business that people hopefully buy into because we've got a very clear identity of the types of people we want to attract. Last couple of slides. B Corps are becoming more important. There's a couple of clients who we work with at the moment who have chosen to go down the B Corp route. I think brands with purpose, brands with clarity, brands that are making a difference are becoming more attractive. I think as an employer brand, that's something to consider in recruitment. Again, if you're a marketeer, you probably share my pain, where it's a constant incentive culture. It's a very young culture, it's very dynamic, and Rolexes get thrown around the sales floor like candy. I think if you're going to build a sustainable long-term brand, it's a challenge for us as marketeers together to create something that's broader reaching than just simply short-term incentives, such as a quarterly target or a quarterly promotion. Holiday incentives, skiing, Ibiza, whatever it may be. We have to think about the brand values long term. So a great example of a podcast that I'm running now, intermittently, shall we say, maybe once a month I try my best. But I'm picking out people out with the recruitment industry that I know, I admire, I respect, or can get my hands on, who are doing great things to impact that could inspire people in the recruitment industry to learn from. And one of the first podcasts was a company called Brewgooder. For every beer that they generate, it's another craft beer, another IPA, there's millions of them. But interestingly, what Brewgooder are doing and what they stand for is giving back a pint of clean drinking water to countries that can't do that. So they're donating and making sure that clean drinking water is going to people who require it and need it in certain countries. And I think that's a really good example of a B Corp, somebody who's building a profitable business, but doing it for good, who are giving back. And that often gets missed with a lot of businesses that we work with as well. Again, I had a client last week where they didn't really know how to describe who they were and what they did, but you actually broke down what they did, and they're literally transforming lives. They're literally changing people's futures, people's outcomes, people's fortunes because of what they do. They work a lot in medical devices, and they didn't really truly understand what that meant. They were just seeing it as a word, a CV and a job title. But when you actually broke down the impact that building a medical device can have on somebody who's lost a hand, lost a leg, lost something in their body where it's got to be replaced, it could be a medical device internally that's, keeping them alive. That's massive. And I think sometimes recruiters miss the impact they're actually having. So B Corp can be one route, or simply talking about the impact that your candidates are having on the planet, on society, or on people's lives. It can sometimes be a stunning story, and we don't tell enough of those stories. We just promote vacancies. We'd forget sometimes to talk about how big an impact our brand and our business is having.